Have you ever caught yourself feeling anxious without a clear reason? Or perhaps you've suddenly noticed a low-grade frustration just sitting in the background without ever actually being able to pin what that frustration is attached to. It's almost as if you feel, whether it be the anxiety, the frustration, the agitation, you feel as if something is off, but you can't quite explain it. I'm here to tell you that's not random. You see, most people don't realize that they're living in the same emotional state on repeat. Different day, different environment, different circumstances, same internal experience. And maybe you can relate. Maybe you call it stress. Maybe you label it anxiety, maybe even pressure, or perhaps you just chalk it up to, this is just how I am. But what's actually happening is far more predictable and far more costly. You're operating from what Ed Milet calls your emotional home. And your emotional home is the baseline emotional state that your nervous system has become familiar with and therefore wired to return to. Not what you want to feel, not what you say you value, what feels normal, what feels comfortable, what feels safe, and what ultimately feels like home. And again, for you, it might be anxiety, might be frustration. For many high performers I work with, it's a collection of pressure, urgency, even low-grade disappointment. But here is when this suddenly begins to become a problem. Your subconscious mind is not designed to make you successful, to help you stand out and thrive. It's designed to keep you alive, to help you survive. And it does so by keeping your reality familiar, comfortable, predictable, safe. So no matter how big your goals are, breaking 80, becoming scratch, scaling your business, closing bigger deals, getting married, your behavior will quietly organize itself on freaking repeat to bring you back home. Specifically, back home to the 2 or 3 emotions that feel most familiar, comfortable, and safe. And the sick, twisted part about all of this is those feelings, those emotions that feel familiar, comfortable, and safe, more than likely, they're not productive. They're destructive. Yet you continue to unconsciously strive to get your fix. And this shows up in many different areas of life, and it looks different for each individual. You might, for example, start around with confidence and suddenly find yourself tightening up for no explanation or explanatory reason. You build momentum in your business, and suddenly you start overthinking, hesitating, pulling back. You get close to a breakthrough, and something inside you subtly sabotages it. And all of this occurs not because you're lazy, not because you lack discipline, but because success at that level feels unfamiliar. And your nervous system and subconscious mind are working in tandem to bring you back to a place of familiarity. You're not sabotaging success as much as you're simply returning to your emotional home. And in today's conversation, I'm going to help you begin to, first and foremost, identify the core emotions present in your emotional home, and then walk you through a phenomenal exercise to help you begin dismantling and ultimately rebuilding your emotional home. And with that said, hey, welcome back to another episode of the Scratch Golfer's Mindset Podcast. Spoiler, this is not a golf mindset podcast. First and foremost, it's a peak performance and personal development podcast designed to help you get unstuck, out of your own way, and unlock your potential. which then shows up beautifully in every area of your life, including on the golf course. I'm your host, Paul Salter. I'm a high-performance hypnotherapist and mindset coach, and I work with high-performing individuals like you to help you unlearn the destructive patterns of feeling, thinking, believing, and behaving that keep you stuck and hold you back from becoming the best you. And I'm really excited about this conversation because it hits home. Pun intended, because I'm a man who loves a good pun. I have a lot of relatability in this sphere of deep inner work because for a while I was trapped in a home that was riddled with scarcity, lack, and anxiety. And it was upon discovering this concept, first introduced to me through Ed Milet, that really helped me connect the dots and then build my own solutions, strategies, and tools to absolutely demolish that emotional home that was keeping me trapped and holding me back from next level success, to ultimately helping me create the home I have today, where there's emotions of joy, contentment, challenge, fulfillment, love, safety, and abundance, all in abundance. And I want that for you. And before we dig into a story and the meat and potatoes of this conversation, thank you. Thank you for listening. Whether you're an OG listener back from one of the first couple of episodes or whether you're a relatively new listener, thank you so much for tuning in. I got an email this past weekend from one of the podcasting SEO tools I use, informing me that on Apple Podcasts in the golf category, this podcast is ranked number 5. Pretty fucking cool. And I owe that to you for listening, for sharing, for leaving a rating and review. Thank you so much. You know, I was just catching up with a great friend of mine just the other day. And when our friendship really began to take off, we were actually both launching podcasts almost within the same week as one another. And that time frame is right about now. End of April, I believe, will mark 2 years for this show. First or second week of May will mark 2 years for him. He just released episode 99. This, I believe, is episode 151. And it's really funny, and feel free to go get a taste of this yourself, to go listen back to some of the first few episodes as I'm finding my footing, trying to determine what this podcast will be. Who and how am I going to show up? Who do I want to speak to? And if you have been a long-time listener, I have an imagination you've noticed significant change, redirection, pivoting, and growth. And it's a night and day, stark fucking contrast between the first 10 episodes and where we are today. Regardless, my goal remains the same: to continue providing you as much value as possible, to continue becoming a better storyteller, interviewer, educator, teacher, and coach, to empower you with all you need to get unstuck and take what it is you learn and hear in these conversations and absolutely fucking apply it so you can become the best you. That's my goal. It won't change. The best is yet to come. But thank you again, seriously, for listening. It means more to me than you know. And with that said, let's dig in. I want to start with a story. One that I have an imagination many of you listening, unfortunately, have some relatability to. And I want to talk to you about one of my clients who, growing up, being at home, it never felt steady. Now, necessarily, it wasn't chaotic all the time. It wasn't yelling every single night or anything like that, but there was always an underlying sense of tension. And in his words, he described childhood as feeling as if he was constantly walking around on eggshells, just waiting for something to happen. Why? Well, because his dad liked to drink. And when dad drank, his anger was next level, unpredictable, explosive, disproportionate to whatever had just happened. So as a kid, he learned something very quickly. Keep the peace. Don't say the wrong thing. Don't draw attention. Don't make a mistake. Do you hear just the anxiety riddled in those few sentences I shared? And honestly, he had good reason for those ambitions, those goals, those intentions. It was to protect himself, to minimize dad's explosive anger because he never knew what might set him off. And here's what's important. This environment didn't just shape his childhood, wasn't even just a breeding ground for some of the patterns that served at that time and ultimately plagued him in his adult years. This environment trained his nervous system. It taught him that home wasn't calm. Home was tense, on edge, waiting for something to go wrong. Fast forward 20, 30 years later. When my client and I first started working together, he was already successful. His business was growing, solid golfer, just under a 10 handicap, fluctuating between an 8 and 9.5 or so. Out from the outside, everything looked like it was working. All was good, but internally, same pattern. He'd get into a big meeting and suddenly feel tight. He'd hear a piece of criticism or a piece of feedback and suddenly stop, abandon his mission, his ground, and try to people please, soothe, avoid conflict and confrontation. He'd start playing well and around and suddenly get cautious, tightening up. Things would be going too well, and he'd almost begin to brace for something to fall apart. And the more I got to know him, the more I could hear this in just his everyday dialogue, how he'd describe events, how he would talk to and about himself. And nothing in his current life, candidly, justified this level of tension. However, his nervous system, his body, didn't know the difference because he wasn't reacting to the present moment and circumstances. He was returning to his emotional home. And what I really need you to hear is that your emotional home is often built in environments you had no control over, but continues to control you until you become aware of it. And for this client in particular, home wasn't peace. It wasn't confidence. It was tension, hyper-awareness, bracing for impact. So no matter how much success he created on the outside, his internal world kept pulling him back to what felt familiar. And it wasn't until we addressed that, not as strategy, not as swing, not as habits, but that underlying emotional baseline, that something was finally going to significantly and sustainably change. Another way to think about your emotional home is the 2 to 3 emotions that serve as the energetic current that really fuel the sabotaging behaviors that show up on a surface level, whether it's the avoidance, conflict avoidance, confrontation, procrastination, perfectionism, this performance anxiety. There are a subset of emotions that you continue to get your sick, twisted fix on because it feels safe, familiar, and comfortable. And the number one objective of your subconscious mind is to keep you safe. Your emotional home is rooted in psychological safety. Another very common example, I have multiple clients, myself included. This was part of my story and my dismantling of an emotional home was growing up with this sense of lack, scarcity, never enoughness, with an undercurrent of anxiety around money. And again, if you are raised in a household where money is tight, there's never enough, there's always tension around conversations related to paying bills, buying groceries, purchasing school supplies, you as a young boy or girl, you absorb that. It feels familiar. It's all you know at that point in your life. And even though you now know that operating with this lack, this scarcity, this undercurrent of anxiety is not a recipe for next level success, you continue to unconsciously seek getting your fix of those emotions, which is why randomly, periodically, you might feel this undercurrent of anxiety, this scarcity, this fear, this worry, even if you can't quite explain it or pin it to an event, person, or circumstance. It's because deep down, it feels familiar. It feels safe. And you are wired to seek familiarity, comfortability, and safety because you are wired to survive, not to thrive. And what I really want you to also hear is that when you're consistently exposed to these feelings, these emotions that are embedded within your psyche from mom, dad, the circumstances, the environment you grew up in, these same emotions are embedded into your identity. They help facilitate the building of your beliefs, the lenses through which you see yourself, the world, others. And it makes up a core component of who you are. And the challenge that so many people work with, and again, specifically men who are prone to being emotionally constipated, I was one of them for 30 plus years. You ain't alone. Most of you are operating completely unaware of the emotions that comprise your emotional home. And it's not until you begin to identify those emotions that you keep coming back to that you're able to take the necessary action steps to dismantle those emotional homes. So a couple questions for you. Listen, write these down, ponder them to help you begin to discover those emotions. Like, listen, what emotion do you keep recreating regardless of circumstance or area of your life? When things are going well, what emotion shows up that changes your behavior? Is it anxiety, fear, worry, anger, frustration? What do you consistently feel before, during, and after perceived pressure-filled moments? So these are great questions to ponder, and I encourage you to take them to your practice of silence and solitude to journal on them. But I want to do one better. And I'm going to challenge you to complete this exercise because in a very short amount of time, you're going to gain immense clarity on the core emotions that make up the foundation of your emotional home. What you're going to do is you are going to set a timer 5 times evenly distributed throughout the day. So for example, that might be 7 a.m., 10 p.m., 1 p.m., 4 p.m., 7 p.m. Obviously adjust plus or minus depending on your sleep and wake schedule. Every single time, and I've talked about this in a previous episode, it's just so much more applicable and impactful to today's conversation. But every time that alarm goes off, you are going to answer this simple question. I feel blank. And you are going to use an emotion, an adjective, a feeling state to describe how you are feeling in that moment. You cannot use the answers good, fine, bad, okay. This is an opportunity in expanding your emotional awareness and emotional vocabulary. So, fortunately for you, you can literally go to Google and type in PDF of emotions or list of different emotions PDF. And you're going to get a list of various descriptors and adjectives to help you better explain how you're feeling besides using the words good, fine, okay, or bad. And you're going to do this 5 times a day for the next 7 consecutive days. And at the end of those 7 days, you're going to have 35 data points. And you're going to be able to see some themes, some patterns. Which emotions are you primarily feeling? You can absolutely repeat the same emotion. So maybe all day you felt anxious, you felt overwhelmed, or you felt angry, hurt, betrayed. But after 1 week, you've got 35 data points. You're going to be able to see some trends emerging. Week 2, you're going to do the same thing. That alarm goes off. I feel angry. The addition during week 2 is I feel blank. And then you're going to specifically write down what it is you are doing in the moment or just previously finished doing. I feel, as an example, anxious. I feel worried. And what I was just doing was preparing my taxes, running payroll, whatever it may be. You're going to do this for a week. And now you're going to have an additional 35 data points. So you'll have 70 data points of various emotions you've experienced the last 2 weeks. And then another 35 data points beginning to give you a glimpse into what behaviors or activities are attached to those feeling states and emotions you're experiencing. And you can do this as long as you want. But after 2 weeks, you're going to have enough data to begin to identify, wow, my emotions that I continue to come back to are worry, agitation, discontent, frustration, sadness, loneliness, regret, resentment, bitterness. And you're going to begin to paint a pattern, or rather paint a picture of those 2 to 3 core emotions you continue to come back to in various aspects of your life. From there, you have now created a jumping off point to look backwards, to begin reflecting on when and how, which circumstances and experiences in early childhood perpetuated those particular emotions. So now we're further expanding your lens of awareness. And you're going to go through this reflective process through a lens of non-judgmental curiosity, like I always encourage you to do, to begin shining even further light on where, when, why, and how these emotions came to be as a part of your emotional home. Because look, until you identify and then begin to dismantle the current collections of emotions that reside in your emotional home, you are going to continue to feel them and both consciously and unconsciously seek to get your fix of them. And if they are composed of emotions that are destructive or incongruent with you becoming the best version of you, you will continue to remain stuck. So I can't shout it any louder. I can't tell you 10 more times. This is a valuable exercise. I do this with many of my clients. It's profound. It's enlightening. It's impactful. Do this exercise. Do this exercise. I want to give you another example, something that hopefully just speaks to you, your situation, and kind of building off of what I alluded to earlier, a very common emotional home that I experienced personally, but with dozens and dozens of clients, is rooted in that lack, scarcity, never enough anxiety that was present during childhood. And this story, although specific to the client I'm going to share it about, is not unique. And the client I'm referring to, he grew up in an environment, 2 younger siblings, money was always tight. Not occasionally tight, not we have to cut back this month, always tight, constant, consistent. There was always this underlying conversation, whether it was directly or indirectly spoken, about not having enough. At the end of the month, when it was time to pay bills and rent, there was heightened, palpable stress. Purchases were questioned. In this household, money wasn't a tool. Money was a source of anxiety. And he specifically remembers hearing some of those cliche phrases. Well, we can't afford that. Money doesn't grow on trees. We have to be careful. And again, it wasn't just the words. It was the feeling, the emotions present in his home. Tension, constraint, scarcity. Even when nothing urgent was happening, there was always a quiet sense of lack. So as a kid, he adapted. He learned to be cautious. He learned not to ask for too much, to play it safe, to avoid taking risk. Because risk didn't feel exciting for this young boy. It felt dangerous, costly, destructive. Now fast forward 30 years later. He's successful, makes fantastic money, runs a strong business. By all accounts on the outside, you'd say this guy's got it figured out. Internally, however, same emotional pattern. He'd have a strong month and begin to tighten up, pull back, play small. Opportunities would approach that would take his business to the next level, and he'd hesitate. He'd second guess. He'd find a way to say no. He'd hold on to money rather than deploying it. He would begin to have success and then suddenly shift gears, starting to play not to lose instead of playing to win. And he could never understand why. Because logically, he knew he was fine. But emotionally, he was still living in a world where there wasn't enough. If scarcity was your emotional home growing up, abundance will feel unsafe even when it's real. So for this client in particular, this perpetuated pattern of getting his fix of scarcity, lack, never enoughness, and anxiety shaped his behaviors around protecting, conserving, and avoiding loss. Again, not because it's what he wanted, but because it's what felt normal, comfortable, familiar, and safe. And this is where it gets real. It wasn't until he became aware that he wasn't making decisions based on his current reality, but based on an emotional pattern from more than 30 years ago, that he was always going to cap his growth. Because no matter how much money he made, his nervous system was still trying to bring him back home to scarcity, caution, and control. So I hope I got your wheels turning. I hope I have turned up the volume of awareness on the emotions that are always just there in the background, sometimes for no good explanation. Maybe you've got a day off or you're on vacation and there's still just this undercurrent of anxiety. You had a record month. You just shot a personal best on the golf course. But there's discontent, mild frustration, agitation. What if it didn't have to be that way? What if instead you could find greater ease, experiencing presence, joy, fulfillment, contentment? It can be that way. First, however, you need to identify the emotions that form your emotional home. And I can't stress enough the value, benefit, and impact of that 2-week exercise I shared with you. It's through that you'll gain immense awareness and clarity on what comprises your emotional home and what triggers you getting your fix of those core emotions. When you have that awareness, you can begin to feel and do different. Specifically noticing that when those emotions arise, how can you change your state, change what you're doing, change your internal dialogue to experience a different emotion? This is where the real work begins. It's feeling something familiar, in this case, anxiety, anger, discontent, rather than rushing through it, avoiding, numbing, coping, repressing, and letting an automated habitual program unravel. You sit with it. You're aware of it. You allow that wave of emotion to wash over you and you choose different, whether to speak different, move different, be different, do different. And in time, that creates a different emotional internal experience. And to really accelerate this, your next step is get clear on the 2 to 3 emotions that you want, desire, and crave to be a part of your emotional home, this new home that you're building. And get incredibly clear on 1 or 2 action steps that you know bring you those feelings. Because that allows you to reverse engineer the path there. So that when the anxiety hits, you're human, it's part of life. You're going to still hit that anxiety, that worry, that fear, that doubt, that uncertainty. But now you know what you can do to shift into a state of control, a state of calm, a state of presence, a state of joy, connectedness, love, whatever it is for you that you desire to be a part of your emotional home. Look, this conversation was quite tactical today. So if you didn't take notes, go back and re-listen. Take the notes, take action on the exercise I shared with you. And I'd love to hear what it is you uncover. How is this experience for you? So feel free, shoot me a DM. Remember, new Instagram @thePaulSalter. That's where I'm hanging out, posting content almost daily. Follow me there. Would love to interact with you there. And hey, if you found this valuable, look, I don't run ads. I have no intention of running ads, but I do ask that you share the show. Share the show with someone you know who's committed to becoming the best version of themselves, yet maybe he or she feels stuck. They need a different perspective. They need this candidly, swift kick in the ass at times to think different so they can begin to do, be, and achieve different. Share the show. And look, it takes 30 seconds to leave a genuine rating, review, whether it be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. That goes a long way in continuing to give me the street cred necessary to bring on the fantastic guests that I've had the pleasure of connecting with. So if you haven't left a review, please, 30 seconds, that's all it takes. I would greatly appreciate it. And with that said, thank you for listening. Have a strong start to the week. Take action on what you learned here today, and I'll catch you in Thursday's episode.